It was a lovely, sunny day when the Alchemy Airlines plane crashed into the Atlantic. Extroverted Feeling was the first survivor to come to. The sharp, salty scent of the ocean jarred her awake. She was alive. Somehow, she was alive. The plane had crashed into an island. Effie could see metallic debris scattered along the beach. 100 yards away, a dark column of smoke spewed towards the clouds. Effie had never felt so alone. She knew that she would never again see her parents, that she would never again feel the touch of her boyfriend, Introverted Thinking, who was sometimes so cold, yet always so magnetic. They had been arguing on the plane over whether or not society was becoming too sensitive, an argument that left both of them stewing in silence. None of that seemed to matter now. It was a cruel joke that she had survived the crash but would still die alone, either from starvation or something much worse. Effie took a deep breath. If she had survived the crash, maybe others did too. This thought was enough to keep her hopeful. She rose from the sandy shore and brushed herself off. Then she trekked across the surf, towards the wreckage of the plane. Introverted Sensing was awake now too. She had wasted little time getting to work, sorting and cataloging all of the resources that had survived the crash. First aid kits, some bits of luggage, all of the etceteras. She let out a little yelp when Extroverted Feeling emerged out of nowhere and hugged her tightly. Secretly, Introverted Sensing loved this, but she could never admit to it. Together, they realized that their chances at survival would increase if they could form some sort of community and divide up the labor. Effie went hunting for more survivors as SI organized supplies. Meanwhile, Introverted Thinking awoke on a distant corner of the island. He quickly located a cave and made a shelter there. He set up many clever traps so that the island fauna could not devour him in his sleep. A situation which he determined would be logically absurd and, besides that, very painful. T.I. remained in his cave for a long time, carving diagrams into the walls with jagged rocks. Using the plane's trajectory and the approximate length of their flight, he worked at deducing how far the island was from civilization. Extroverted Intuition was the last survivor to wake up. This was par for the course. He always slept in, to the disappointment of every authority figure in his life. Even when Effie found him and shook him awake, he begged her for just 5 more minutes. "I'm having a really awesome dream right now," he said as a seagull yanked at his left sandal. After Effie dragged him to his feet, she wiped a bead of blood from his forehead. Annie took a long look at her and said, "Wow, you must be an angel." Her ensuing giggles confirmed this, and he instantly daydreamed of all the kinds of dates they could go on if they ever escaped this island. They could go skydiving, or create a couples comedy act, or spend a whole day oohing and awing at items in an IKEA. The chemistry was almost unbearable in his head. Of course, then she mentioned her boyfriend, which yanked him back to reality. Annie decided that he was already bored and that they were much better off as friends. The pair journeyed back to the waterfront, where SI was sorting articles of clothing into piles by color. "What are you doing?" Annie asked, rather obnoxiously. "Hello to you too," SI said as she folded a pink shirt and positioned it in its pile. "If we're going to live on this island, we're going to need structure. Each color will correspond with a particular chore. This," she said, pointing to the pink pile, "will be the janitorial color. Unless you have any other talents, that will be your role on this island." "Hey, no way am I cleaning up after the two of you for the rest of my life." Annie felt something like an anti-chemistry with Introverted Sensing. In her, he saw the source of all of life's suffering. "We don't have to live on this island, you know. We can escape," he insisted. "And the answers aren't going to be found by taking inventory for the 100th time. We need to explore. The solution is bound to be out there." With that, Extroverted Intuition, who always fancied himself a hero, darted off into the jungle. He was never heard from again. Well, that's how the story would have ended if SI had her way. During his island exploration, Annie found many bizarre things. Underground hatches, empty villages, a monster composed of rattling smoke. At one point, he even encountered a polar bear. Things that defied all apparent logic. Thankfully, he was about to meet the most logical guy on the island. When he wandered into Introverted Thinking's cave, There were two important things that Annie failed to notice. First was a wet shirt drying on a tree branch outside, a sign of life. The second thing was the arrow trap by the cave's entrance. The third thing was the arrow itself, which lodged into a patch of dead nerves at his shoulder. He didn't even notice the arrow until T.I. emerged, half naked from the shadows. "Dude, are you okay? Would you look at that?" Annie said as he poked the wound. Together they rushed back to the beach. When introverted thinking saw extroverted feeling hurrying towards them through the sea foam, his lips quivered. His eyes twitched as his brain tallied up in emotion. He realized, out of nowhere, just how much he had missed her. The two of them embraced for what felt like hours, until Effie caught sight of the arrow protruding from Annie's shoulder. That's when she rushed away to grab SI and a first aid kit. The extraction took all night, and ended with everyone asleep, huddled together on the open sand. With introverted thinking and extroverted feeling reunited, the four survivors were able to coexist. The lovebirds were perfect mediators for the arguments between the other two. T.I. would double-check that what everyone was saying actually made sense, while Effie verified that no one was hurt when things got too heated. Their biggest fight was about escaping the island. SI had already grown fond of the island and the memories she had formed there. She thought that they were better off moving into one of the abandoned villages. Staying here seemed safer than any alternative. Even the other two survivors had trouble arguing with this. But Annie wanted more. After all, T.I. had figured out that the mainland wasn't that far away, and besides, Annie had found some rope in one of the village homes. What if he constructed a pair of wings from seagull feathers and rope, and then jumped from the island's tallest cliff? What if he could fly all the way to the mainland and get help? His idea was met with cold silence. Even Effie could only offer him a look of pity. It seemed that everyone was resigned to wasting their days away on this lonely island. Defeated, Annie wandered over to the pile of pink shirts and contemplated his fate. A life of cleaning up other people's messes. He could barely clean up his own. "Wait!" he shouted. Okay, so my first idea was crazy. But what if we made a raft? We could take the needles from the first aid kits and sew a sail out of all of these clothes. That could work, right? "Should be doable," said T.I., who had dropped to his knees and was already sketching a schema in the sand. Extroverted intuition grinned. "So, what do you guys think?" "How clever," said Effie. "You crazy son of a gun," said T.I. "You crazy said S.I., but at least she had a smile on her face. It was an ugly, cold day when they finally pushed the raft into the lapping waves of the Atlantic. They had toiled over their creation for a week. All of them were exhausted but ready for whatever came next. As they left the shoreline, they each turned and waved goodbye to the island. Then T.I. and Effie went to adjust the sail. Its patchwork colors billowed beautifully in the wind. Annie sat down beside S.I. at the front of the raft. "You did a good job arranging this whole thing," he said. "And you had a great idea," she replied. They both smiled. "Hey," Annie began, "did you know that the ancient Greeks didn't have a word for blue? They said that the ocean was wine dark." "I did not know that," S.I. said. "Man, I could really use some wine right now." "Same. Maybe once we reach mainland?" "Yeah, maybe." And thus they moved across those wine-dark waters. 4 functions united on one raft, floating slowly but surely in the direction of home. 4 functions united on one raft, floating slowly but surely in the direction of home.